Hello everyone, it's Wilma reporting from Life Beautiful, and I have your daily news of what's gonna help you survive through the quarantine or self-isolation or whatever you're doing. Sweden is still partying, man. Like, all my friends from Sweden, like, they haven't done anything to stop the spreading. They have this theory that if like a certain number of people get it, then if 60% gets the corona, the spreading will stop because the majority is immune, which is true, I guess, but it's a very way of going about it. But I'm not in Sweden anymore, we're in Denmark, so I'm also in my PJs, so that's what we're doing today. Today I actually got a really good recommendation list. I'm so pleased with the recommendations I'm going to give you guys. So this is a quarantine, self-isolation, whatever you call it, recommendation list. And I realized while making this, and I've been watching a lot of like reading vlog videos, that most people actually want to read like fun, light, like engaging stories. So if that's what you want, then this is maybe not the list for you. Like, these have all elements of quarantine in them, but they're also great books. I think I gave all of these books like 4 or 5 stars, almost all of them 5 stars. But also something I also noticed about this list, which is super cool, is that I've never included any of these books in any recommendation video ever. So that's pretty cool, right? Yeah, let's get started. I'm excited. It's 10 books we're going to talk about, and I'm just going to start, and I'm going to tell you what the isolation element is. And I think I've got a book for every single type of reader and person on this list, which is pretty impressive. You're going to be impressed. The first one is The Shining by Stephen King. This is, I mean, dude, I guess you know what it is. It's about this character called Jack Terrence, and he gets a new job as this keeper on the Overlock Hotel. So he goes there with his son and his wife, and it takes care of it over the winter to make sure that things doesn't freeze over. But while they're there, Jack kind of slowly goes insane, and there's all these like small magical things going on in this house. And you're also following the son, I think his name is Danny, son, who has this magical ability called The Shining, which is some sort of like very strong intuition. So originally when I read this, it's not a very scary book actually. It doesn't have any like jump scares, but it's very good at like analyzing the human psyche and kind of scaring you in like an underlying way. So I know maybe it's not the best great thing to recommend like a horror to read, but this is about isolation, and I also think it's a great one to read if you haven't read it. I think everyone kind of like should read these things. Oh my god, Ella is being very extra right now. Because I think it's like kind of like educational to know what this book is about. So if you haven't read it, now is a good time to delve in. Next we have Laundress by Brandon Sanderson. This book is like a way underrated for Brandon Sanderson. Like, everyone says this is like one of his worst books, but I loved it. I think it's so good, and it also has an element of like disease and quarantine. If you're super scared about like the disease, maybe don't read this one. This is about kind of the city called Laundress, where all these gods used to live, and one day the gods kind of got this disease that turned them more into like zombies, like living dead in a way, and it also spread through like different people. So in this you're following many different perspectives, and the prince, he also gets it, and he gets isolated, and he is kind of like the main character. And so what's happening in like today's life in Laundress is that Laundress is isolated, like it's locked off, and anyone who gets this disease is like thrown in there. But it also follows like religion, and the main point of this is kind of like a commentary on religion, which I think could be like really helpful in today's time. And Brandon Sanderson is a super easy read, and it's very engaging, like you're in the story, and I think that could definitely help like to distract from our world right now. I should have started from the bottom up, because I realize these get less and less intense the further way I go down, but some of these are kind of like, I understand why I don't want to read it right now. This is The Collector by Joan Fowles. This is one of my top 3 classics of all time. This is about this girl who gets kidnapped by this guy, and she has to spend a certain amount of time in the basement of the guy. So obviously she's isolated, she's in quarantine, and it's really, really interesting, like the relationship between the guy and her, and how he thinks and his mind and how it works. The first half of the book is the guy's perspective, and the second half of the book is the same events but from her perspective, which is completely different. I love following people who are like mentally unwell in like a very not normal way, if you know what I mean. I love this book. I obviously have like a lot of notes. I definitely think this is like a read, and it's quite short. I definitely think this is a read. Did I say that? It's a great read and you should read it. Great book. Next we have one that's going to remind you of how scary it could be, but it's not. It's not as bad as you think. You think the world is going under, well then you haven't read this book. This is The Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham. This is about this guy who has something wrong with his eyes, so he goes into the hospital and he has like an eye surgery, so his eyes are covered, and while this guy is like having this recovery process, something, is it a light that shines in the sky that makes everyone who saw it, which is like the majority of the people on the planet, blind. And at the same time, these plants called the Triffids kind of rise up and they start killing humans, and the humans are at a huge disadvantage because the biggest thing we have is that we can see, and imagine if we couldn't see and these plants were attacking us, what would we do, you know? So it's kind of like an apocalypse type of book, like a dystopian, but it's also very interesting. And I know this is a movie, I haven't seen the movie yet, but I think that would also be fun to see the movie. Maybe I should watch the movie. I think maybe I gave this 3-4 stars, so it's definitely like my least favorite book on this list, just so you know. Then we have the most probably calming and needed book throughout this time. This is actually a nonfiction called The Diary of a Bookseller by Sean Bythell. This is a nonfiction book slash diary that Sean has made. He is a bookseller, and every day I think he writes a little bit what he did that day, and it's so calming. I recommend getting the audiobook and then listening to it, like maybe you can listen to one day each day. That would be really, really cool. Or like a couple of days. It is, yeah, it's so calming because he spends most of the time, almost all of his time in this bookshop in Scotland, and you just get to follow like people who come into the bookstore, some reflections it has. It's very like sarcastic and kind of, what do you call, passive aggressive in like a very funny old man type of way. Definitely recommend this, especially the audiobook. I haven't read the physical form, but I just like having the physical form because the copy is so beautiful. This is for all of you book lovers who can't go to the bookstore anymore. I know the struggle. We still have online shopping. We have our books at home if you're that kind of person, but this is gonna like quench your thirst for the book love, if that makes sense. Then we have, this is a book I read like a long time ago, and when I read it, it was very needed, and I actually have a book review for this book. This is Finding Audrey by Sophie Kinsella. This is kind of like old recommendations because I think you all know about it already, but this is a contemporary about this girl called Audrey who has some sort of illness, so she has to stay inside her house her whole life. So basically a constant quarantine. But then she meets this guy and like a romance thing starts, but it's also really funny because I think it's because of anxiety that she stays home actually. Yeah, it's anxiety. And her psychologist or someone, her therapist, tells her she should video log her family doing their daily stuff or just like participate in some sort of activity at home, and so she starts filming her family, and it's really, really funny. I thought it was so funny. There's this one part where she like films her dad and her mom, and it's just really good. And it's also like a super, super easy read. Like you fly through this in a day if you have nothing to do. Next we have a book that's gonna give you some perspective. This is like sort of a recent read, a very short one, so that's great for that. This is To Be Taught If Fortunate by Beckett Chambers. I read this in one day, and I would highly, highly recommend that you also read it in one day. It says on the back it's a novella. It's kind of separated into 4 different parts because it's about this ship of 3 scientists, I think, that flies out into the galaxy, into actually on one specific solar system where there's 3, I think, 4 inhabitable planets. She, the main character, she has to go down on each planet together with her crewmates and kind of assess how the ecological system and how if it's inhabitable, and she's just kind of there to like observe and take notes and that kind of thing. It is so calming to read, and I think we all need the perspective that like life is always gonna live, you know, like everything is gonna be fine, you know. We have to trust ourselves, the planet, the universe. Like you just have to trust, you know. And I know that's like easy to say, but it's very like hard to accomplish. But You just have to tell yourself these things, and I think this book is very good at giving that third person perspective on what's going on. Yes, I highly recommend. I really loved it. Then we have a book also I read a really long time ago. This is More Than This by Patrick Ness. This is about this guy who wakes up in a boy drowns, desperate and alone. In his final moment, he dies. Then he wakes, naked and bruised and thirsty, but still alive. Okay, so this, I remember how this book ended, and I also gave this 5 stars because I remember I was sitting at this coffee house and I was crying at the end because it was giving me all these feels. But this is a dystopian YA science fiction, and he wakes up in this kind of like world that's very different, and there's no humans there, so he's basically alone. There enters the isolation. And he has to figure out what happened to the world, what happened to humanity. And I think this is like a really interesting read to read right now because I don't remember exactly what happened to humanity, but it's really interesting when you find out. And I think, is this the right time to read dystopians? I don't know. Either it's like the perfect time or it's definitely not the perfect time. You decide. But it's a YA, it's a quick read, and it's really good. It's really emotional, I think, if I remember right, and it has great LGBTQ plus representation. Okay, another isolation book. This is I read recently, and I also gave it like 5 stars. I think this is Minecraft The Island by Max Brooks. It's the first one in the Minecraft novels. This one is about this person that wakes up in Minecraft, the game, the island. He's completely alone. He doesn't know anything about his... Damn it! I keep calling him he, but he doesn't have a gender. They don't have a gender because they don't know anything about their previous life. They wake up on this island and they have to survive, and it's pure like survival instinct, and I'm like so happy I'm not this person, that I'm just home now and I know all the rules of the universe, and they have to survive. They don't know anything, you know? So it's like a book also about isolation because they are the only person on this island. It's like in a game, so it makes like a different perspective from what we're experiencing, so it's still like sci-fi and fun. It's a super easy read. It was really interesting because it had great commentary on our world while still being like very disconnected from what we're experiencing and what's going on in our world, because the person doesn't know anything about where they're coming from. Highly recommend. Then we have the last book on this list. I think actually that this book is the best one. My favorite book out of all of these on this list, and it's also maybe the most appropriate book to read if you don't want something that's super heavy, too much of like dystopian, what's going on in this world, like too reflective what's happening. This is Killing Commendatore by Haruki Murakami. So far, I think this is my second favorite Haruki Murakami book. It is surrealism, like magical realism in a way, and it is about this guy who gets a divorce. He buys this house on a mountain. He moves there and he's a painter, so all he does is try to like find himself again, connect with who he is, and he spends all this time painting. And then weird things start to happen. He starts to spy on the neighbor that's kind of like on another mountain further away. This guy pops out of a painting. He learns more about the history of the painter that lived in the same house before him. He finds this well that's blocked up outside of his garden, and somehow it's all connected. Classic Murakami style. I chose this book because it has something special. It's one of my favorite books and I don't talk about it enough. It is also about like isolation because the guy is isolated, but discovery and finding joy in being alone, and it's about so many things. I highly recommend it. It's also quite thick, so like you're gonna be entertained for quite a while. I think I actually read this over 2 weeks because I felt like I needed to like digest what was happening. Definitely recommend. Also, this cover is really beautiful. So those are the 10 favorite... I can't believe I found almost all books that I haven't recommended before, but are still like favorite reads. Isn't that awesome? Anyways, you can... Other recommendations, you can go out and check out my favorite sci-fi recommendations list, a recommendation list for when you're tired of reading the same books. I have a recommendation list for high fantasy, so check out those. I'll link them all down below. You can also read like fly through a manga series, start a new epic series, The Wheel of Time, Way of Kings, like tackle that series that you have been wanting to read for a while, like binge it. I recommend doing that if none of these appeal to you. Also look up like light fluffy reads if that's what you want. I don't read those kind of books all that much, so can't recommend recommend any, but I hope you find something good to read and that you're all taking care of yourselves, like emotionally and physically. And I wish you so much love, sending you all love, happy thoughts. I hope you're all doing fantastic. Mwah, 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 mwah. Okay, bye!